Welcome everybody to the first session of today around the theme of built environment. Thanks a lot to Emily for that fascinating presentation just now, and I think really relevant to some of the topics we're going to address in the session today. So there's myself, I'm Professor Katharine Willis from the University of Plymouth, and Sarah Lee, my co-chair, are just going to give a brief introduction, and then we'll move on to two speakers who we'll hear from in a minute. So just going to give you a brief overview of the sort of topic and some of the issues you may be thinking about in the terms of the built environment. So 25% of the UK's total greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to the built environment, and they're used really throughout the whole sort of stage of construction and use cycle, from the manufacture of materials through construction and maintenance to eventual demolition. So the challenge of net zero is very much a challenge around the built environment. And the sort of ways to achieve it, really do involve a sort of thorough rethink of how we think about the way in which we build, but also the way in which we live in the built environment. And I think, as Emily highlighted, we know a lot about what the challenge is and what the opportunities or challenges are around the sort of global outcomes, SDGs. There is SDG 11, obviously, around sustainable cities and communities. And at policy level, there's a lot. And I think really where we're moving to now is understanding how the local and that model of intervention, how that's going to work, how we deliver the outcomes we are looking at. So particularly down the bottom two stages of this vision for the built environment, how we move to a net zero and how that pathway is through working together and in more participatory ways. So we're looking at the built environment and the pathway to zero. The role of people and the role of sort of communities and stakeholders is really key. So mobilising people is really around that supporting behaviour change, engaging people through innovative methods and innovative technologies, and also empowering communities to work in partnership with industry to make that change. So one of the sort of key themes when we will look at in some of the talks today is around that idea of what that looks like in terms of a new model of co-design, partnership, participation, where we're really working together with people to empower them to make that change. That aspect in which universities or industry can do around participatory models, but also innovation, living labs and applied research, looking at how we can innovate to a future that's working together. The use of sort of smart or digital technologies in the way that we innovate in the built environment space, and how that might enable us to both visualize but also help people to take those behavior change shifts. And finally, what we've mentioned just now around the just transition. So if we're going to enable people to make that change, it does really involve recognizing who does that, who's involved, but also the wider implications around health, the social value of that change, and how we incorporate that in the pathways that we take. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, who's going to talk about some of the work she's doing in this space and how she's working with a whole set of stakeholders in the transition in the Southwest. So Sarah, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Katharine. As Katharine said, I'm an architect. I work for Stride Triglawn here in Plymouth. I'm also the Southwest Chair for the Royal Institute of British Architects at the moment. Back in 2019, when the climate emergency declarations were declared, I decided we needed to be talking more about this, demystifying what we could do in our sector. And as Katharine said, mine is obviously the built environment and construction. So I got in touch with the university, and in collaboration with the team at the Sustainability Hub, we set up a series of webinars. Originally, it was going to be a conference. Next slide, please. And we called it Future Plymouth 2030. I realised that there was a lot more that we needed to be doing to upskill ourselves and our teams and understand what we should be doing to help reduce carbon in our sector. So Future Plymouth was set up. Next slide, please, Katharine. As a series of webinars, as I said, it was unfortunately during the times of COVID. We were going to hold a physical conference initially, but we realised we were going to be stuck at home for a while. So actually, we'd already set up a working group and had some great ideas, speakers and topics already set up. And over the 2 years of various lockdowns, we delivered 30 live webinars online, which is obviously 2 hours each, over 60 hours of content. It's all recorded and hosted on our YouTube channel. Next slide, please, Katharine. And during that time, we had nearly 2,000 people attending these webinars. We were covering all sorts of different topics. As this slide is just a a snapshot of some of the different things that we covered, talking about future housing, what that might look like, health and well-being of people coming out of COVID, what urban design features might need to be addressed. As Katharine said, behaviour change plays a big part in that. Looking at what the all-electric house might look like, how biodiversity can play a better part in, or a better role in how we design buildings, and the circular economy, looking at how we reduce waste, reuse buildings rather than just demolishing them and discarding them. And we were achieving an average of sort of 70 to 80 people live at each of those webinars. So it was really well received. And I think that just goes to demonstrate the appetite that there was for people wanting to understand what they could do. We've still got a mailing list of about 600 people who want to follow what we're doing. And it just, it varied from students to retired folk who just want to know more. So I think the people power element is really important in this journey towards net zero. I think that's probably it for me. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I just wanted to mention quickly as well that Cornwall Council have been in touch with me recently, because they really like the engagement and the range of people that I've managed to attract through Future Plymouth. So I'm currently looking at trying to set up a Future Cornwall. So watch this space. And now we're going to move on to our speakers for the next session. We're going to start with Rosie Buckley from British Gas, talking about smart homes and how saving energy can be achieved through people and technology. And then we move on to Dr. Alejandro Veliz Reyes from the University of Plymouth, talking about a project in Bridport. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katharine and Sarah. And I hope that I'm going to be able to pick out a couple of those key themes that you talked about. Obviously, my presentation is largely on smart technology, but that people power that you also talked about, Sarah, is clearly fundamental. And I'll bring out those points about the key interplay between the technology and people as really being critical to our path to net zero. So, hi everybody, I'm Rosie Buckley. I'm Head of Operational Strategy at Centrica Business and Net Zero. Within my role, I have oversight for engagement in the Southwest, which has included a collaboration with Barclays in Plymouth of last year, when we created an Exploring Home Energy Efficiency exhibition, supporting, I also support the growth of Exeter College's Green Construction Advisory Panel through chairing the Western Gateway chapter of that organisation. And most recently, with our Hive brand, we have been the headline sponsor for the Royal Bath and West Show. I'm delighted to be here today, and I would like to say a big thank you to the University of Plymouth and to the Sustainable Earth Institute for inviting me to speak to you. I'm here to talk about smart homes and how they are a key enabler to saving energy through technology and the people that use it. I've just got a bit of a delay on the slides. Can I just find out whether others were able to see a second slide then?
No, that didn't work.
Okay.
Try stopping sharing and starting again, just see if that helps.
All the best rehearsals.
Could we maybe move on to Alejandro and then Rosie? We'll see what we can work out in the background.
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
Well, my suggestion would be, if Rosie doesn't mind, is perhaps just leaving up the normal, because you can flick through the screen as it is, and I know we can see your notes, but if that might be all right, okay, we could do it that way.
Yeah, if you're happy, I'm happy to do that. So, as I'm sure many of you are all too aware, in the UK, 26% of all carbon emissions come from our domestic heating and personal transport. And that means that tackling home heating and decarbonisation will be integral to helping the nation reach net zero. But if if we want to engage people to reduce the carbon footprint of their home, it needs to be simple and it needs to be affordable. This is key to our ambition at Centrica to energise a greener, fairer future for everyone. That is to progress towards cleaner, more secure energy while making sure no one is left behind. At the same time, the energy landscape is changing. As we go through our energy transition, our new system will be renewable, electrified, and increasingly digital. And in the same way that our energy system is evolving, so too are our customers, and our customers' willingness to engage with the energy market and their home energy management has exploded. And at the heart of that evolution is smart technology that will give customers more choice over how and when they use their energy, and crucially, to ensure that no energy is wasted. So as part of Centrica, we provide energy products and services to over 10 million UK homes and businesses, and have built up a range of insights into our customers' needs and wants through our smart home brand Hive. With all of that data gathering and insight, and the benefit of connecting to the wider network across British Gas and Centrica, we've been able to look at the future of home energy management. As we progress with the decarbonisation of homes, electrification is going to become an increasing presence in our lives. The opportunity here is to further optimise that process through connected devices and the simplification that can bring for all of our customers. Whether it be heat pumps, smarter use of boiler technology, EV chargers, we will likely see an increasing amount of devices being interconnected to provide simplicity and enhanced control for homeowners by bringing currently disparate devices into one app interface. In addition, as consumers continue to engage with the energy market, we'll see a smarter use of the grid and customers thinking about how they are leveraging energy to make it work for them, whether it be through increased use of data and insights, or shifting how and when they use energy to change their consumption habits and reduce their bills. What you can see in this slide is a potential home of the future, which demonstrates an ecosystem of smart technology that is interconnected and easily controlled, making the home, rather than sitting at the end of the gas grid or the end of electricity network, the home becomes the virtual power plant that has the ability to generate some or all of its own energy. However, in moving to this new reality, it is absolutely vital that we make sure that no one is left behind. It's not our job to tell customers what to do or how quickly to adopt this technology, or indeed in what order, but it is our job to give them choices to support their individual journeys to decarbonise their homes. And the beauty of the ecosystem is that customers can travel at the pace that feels right for them and in line with their appetite and their budget. We know that not every customer is ready to dive straight in and get a heat pump tomorrow, but the key is getting people to start thinking about what might work for them. And the good news is that they can start with a free smart meter to help monitor the energy they are consuming. The key point is that when people are ready to take the next stage of the journey, they know what the potential solutions are and what is available to them. As consumers take a more active role in their home energy system, we need to give them more information and resources to take those steps on their decarbonisation journey. And we know that managing home energy often means balancing attention between convenience, comfort, and cost. And in terms of mental models, this constant decision-making between priorities is often more tangible to people than the energy system itself, which can feel quite complex. As a result, we have seen customers wanting help in managing this tension and having the data and insights at their fingertips to make decisions that work for them. As you'll see here, the Hive app gives a simple, holistic approach to home energy management. The key is an easy-to-use interface that customers can engage with, and they really do engage. 67% of our Hive app users interface with it every single day. Interaction with our app shows us that heating history, budget tracker, and schedule assist are the most popular features as customers look to gain more insight on their own energy habits. And while saving money and the environment are often mentioned in one breath, the perception is also often that being sustainable within your household is conflicting with either reducing bills or comfort, and the app can show something else. To build the knowledge of our customers, we have built customer archetypes, which highlight the divide in our customers' lifestyles and which often drive opposing behaviours. This has been a really useful way for us to get into the mindset of our customers and to understand their individual needs and wants. First, we have the hedonist. This person puts comfort first, but also wants control. This person is not ready to compromise on their lifestyle, but they do want to see and track where and how they can use energy better. Next, we have the squirrel, someone who puts savings first, but also wants full control. They want their energy usage to be as minimal as possible. And to do that, they want to have a detailed tracking view of their devices. Then we move on to the diva, who puts comfort first, but delegates control. They're not ready to compromise their lifestyle for a few savings and believe their tools should automatically improve what can be. And finally, we have the optimizer, who puts their savings first, but delegates control. They are very conscious about reducing the cost of home energy, but they don't want to spend too much time finding solutions themselves. Sorry. This shows us two key things. First, that people are at the heart of the energy transition, and by engaging them, we help to reduce carbon emissions coming from heating and personal transport. And secondly, that there is no one-size-fits-all model when it comes to how people will manage their energy and the role that they expect to play in the energy management of their own homes. What we need to do is give people the tools that they need as individuals to decarbonise. Last year, we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of Hive, marking a decade since we sold our first thermostat and helping 2 million thermostat users daily save energy on their bills and decarbonising their homes. To mark that 10th anniversary, we dug into the data and we found that Hive customers have collectively saved over 1 million tonnes of carbon emissions from being emitted into the atmosphere and almost £325 million on their energy bills. And it's not just connectivity and control that's driving this interest. Extreme weather and cultural events have also played a role. We have seen that peaks in Hive sales have aligned with key weather events, such as flooding in 2014 and the Beast from the East in 2018. With weather being increasingly unpredictable and people more concerned about how much energy they are using, it's fitting that they are turning to technology to help them to better manage their energy usage and to save money. So, as I hope I've shown, there is a lot of opportunity for households as our energy system transitions. And in the future of the connected home, smart technology will only create more opportunities for the customer and the planet to benefit. The key is ensuring that the technology is simple and puts people in control of their energy usage. The journey to decarbonise our homes is a personal one, with people at different stages of the journey. But through personalised insights, we are empowering customers to make their own decisions and go at the pace that they feel comfortable with. Thank you all for your time today. I look forward to continuing the conversation in the Q&A.
Thank you, Rosie. And now we'll move to Alejandro, Dr. Alejandro Veliz Reyes.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Katharine. Let me just share screen and see if it works. does this work? Can you see this?
Yes, we can see that.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Right. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak today, and the organizers and the Sustainable Earth Institute and everyone joining this panel. My name is Alejandro. I'm an associate professor in digital design in the School of Art, Design and Architecture, and I'm going to talk to you about more than a project is probably a trajectory of projects of us engaging with rural spaces and housing and modern methods of construction, how we can design and build better houses using technologies that benefit the local community. So there is a sustainability aspect to that in relation to low carbon local materials that I'm going to mention in a second, but there is also I would argue a social sustainability aspect, right? How to really embed and implement technologies that benefit, for example, the development of local skills or the improvement of other social outcomes in rural coastal communities. So the work we have done is multidisciplinary in that sense, and this is my research team. Some of them in previous projects, but we have been very lucky to have a really brilliant team of research fellows and research assistants helping us throughout the way over the last 4-5 years. COVID time doesn't count, isn't it? So 3 or 5 years, and also a range of local and as well as international partners that have engaged with us in this agenda. So the first thing to say probably is why rural and how we ended up operating in this space. Rural communities are just wonderful. Really, they have I would say a feeling of being maybe sometimes left behind, sometimes struggle to see, or sometimes actually government struggles to kind of penetrate those communities with things like leveling up funding. And that usually leads to very small and cohesive communities as well. That's the case in Bridport. They have a really interesting kind of governance. They have community organizations already mobilized to cover gaps or to sometimes backfill gaps that normally in a urban environment you would expect government or councils to kind of address. So you already have communities that are fairly kind of organized and mobilized and are quite willing to take action in terms of envisioning their future built environments in the case of our research. And Bridport is also quite representative of other rural and coastal communities, and we have seen that in other areas of research in the University of Plymouth. The university has a center for coastal communities that really looks in very multidisciplinary ways at things like the social or health outcomes of communities that are often marginalized or suffering from different types of inequity, like geographic marginalization or digital inequity or problematic kind of health outcomes. And Bridport is a representative of some of those conditions. Is an aging population, young people leave trying to find jobs elsewhere, and really has struggled to pick up and rebuild that social economic fabric after it was during the Industrial Revolution the UK capital of rope and sail, a really large hemp and flax industry. And it hasn't recovered from kind of losing some of those industries so far. So there is this feeling of not just the data that informs issues of marginalization or deprivation, but also people we talk to doing our field work, they feel also marginalized. We're far from everything. We don't have a train station and so on. So it's a community that sometimes struggles to kind of envision what those futures might look like for them, and young people leave, so they have a large aging population as well. So there's a number of issues that are interrelated to questions about housing and built environment here. Luckily, as I said before, they have already some community organizations in place. One of them is Raise a Roof. That is a coalition of community and creative and civic kind of town council really coming together to try to establish ways to develop better built environments. And they approach us, and that was a really interesting way for us to look at technology and look at modernity and what architectural innovation can do for them. They don't necessarily were willing to establish fabrication and design expertise for the sake of only having better houses, but also they were willing to explore those spaces in order to teach young people high value skills so they don't have to leave, right? So that really shifted a little bit for us, this vision of technology in construction as an efficiency tool, right? Or technology in construction as a way to perform better, build faster or cheaper, but how technology can offer more place-based interventions, which are maybe more aligned with the common good and social agendas around regeneration and the benefit of the broader society. So it was a really interesting space for us to step in. We got an initial EPSRC grant, and then COVID hit, so it was a bit odd, but to try to explore, working with local materials, using digital fabrication resources. But I would say that probably the more substantial chunk of kind of research and fieldwork and engagement with this place was funded by the AHRC Design Exchange Partnership Framework. That was a fund hosted by the Future Observatory and the Design the Green Transition Program, which at the time was the largest kind of publicly funded design research and innovation program in the UK, led by the arts and humanities, using a design in residence approach, right? That meant embedding researchers in these communities to try to better understand these challenge areas and really try to develop design-led or creative-led interventions that work and stick to those places, right? So that was the first project we got, building with Bridport, funded by the HRC with Wessex Community Assets, which is part of Raise the Roof, and the barn you see in the background is actually part of our fieldwork. We realized that this is a space that looks into technology in a way that is interconnected and enmeshed with a lot of cognate areas of development, rural transitions as well. How do we move out of rurality as a productive space, and not only a productive space, but also a creative space and a space for social innovation? And how do we do so in consideration to the availability of local materials, local supply chains, employment, and participation of our community in the delivery or envisioning, right, of our future built environment? So in order to host these conversations and in order to really be able to look into a more hands-on approach to social innovation, one of the biggest chunks of support we were able to implement through AHRC funding was our living lab. We rented this barn where you just saw the house, and it's a rural housing lab. It's a space for us to store materials and experiment with material systems. And you can see some timber frames on the background that we use to experiment on different wall build-up systems, for example, or local hemp insulation systems. And we try to really look into the intersections between architectural production technologies and local skill sets and local material availabilities and local ways of building. So it's a highly experimental space. You can see piles of hemp in the background. It's not very tidy at the moment of this video, but this is the reality of that space actually. And we were able to rent it out and have a range of workshops and activities to really try out ideas about local construction and these kind of material futures. Part of that involve also not only engaging with builders, but also with local community, in some cases not in building activities, but also on creative thinking around material futures and creative thinking around what those materials futures look like for them and what do they think about housing. So instead of having these kind of structured, if you wish, interviews and workshops, we set up pop-up fab labs and making activities, and we have a trove of really beautiful, gorgeous local creative media output that from an arts perspective really reflect and are the byproduct of the local community engaging with discussions about housing. All this was facilitated again by our designer in residence. So we had a local designer appointed to be on a 0.6 kind of 3 days, 4 days a week contract for almost a year in Bridport. So she was able to embed herself in this community and really tease out all these nuggets of really interesting information about what housing means to them, but also what the environmental agenda means to them, what the employment agenda means to them, and how these things are interrelated to each other. Our experimentation with technology didn't only stop at the point of inquiring and asking people about things, but actually co-designing and envisioning housing futures as well, some of which actually yielded some really lovely pieces of data, like this man describing his dream home, for example, and how that home relates to conditions of place and his own life. And it's almost is technical to an extent, trying to understand the role of technology here, but it's also almost poetic in the other end in terms of how local people envisioning living and housing in their communities. This drive for co-design and participation really took us down the pathway of trying to understand technologies in place and what place-based intervention means in the context of automation kind of research and digital fabrication research. And not only we collected a ton of data from local stakeholders through interviews, but also through testing and demonstrating building systems with them in ways that are much more, I would say, engaged and much more responsive to their local landscape and the local material languages that you would see in places like Bridport, right? There are complexities, of course. Natural materials do not like digital fabrication tools. They are complex. They bend, they warp, they have cracks, they have knots, they have morphological richness that you don't find in standard sheet materials or other industrialized forms of housing production or building production. So part of our work was to really try to reconcile those two worlds and really try to think about how or when are we able to really think about technology in the context of local supply chains that are much more low carbon, and again, promote local employment and promote local ways of building. Here we can see how this project kind of matured a little bit over time. This is the same barn, but this time used by the local community to build a local facility designed by a local practice called Common Practice. And now we could see how the project kind of evolved a little bit into not only inquiring participants about their views on automation in place, let's say, but by actively participating on the construction and delivery of their own built environment. So this is a construction of a local building. The common house is a facility, is a community facility, multi-purpose kind of building, which they built themselves. And you can see community members kind of shoving local hemp into these panels to try to really engage with things like insulation, building with timber, structural elements, and whatnot. So it's a really interesting way to, again, tease out further understanding of local innovation and participation in the production of the built environment. There's a very particular aspect of the natural environment here that stem from our work, concerns about local landscape, concerns about where timber comes from, concerns about ash and the dieback disease that some of you might know is going to decimate our forest, and what to do with that resource or what not to do with that resource, and how the environment is fairly enmeshed with the daily lives of this rural kind of community. So we really shape with them questions about excuse me, about where material comes from, how the supply chain looks like, how we try to really promote low carbon construction using locally available materials, and how those materials can also help us rethink broader landscape issues in areas like regenerative forestry, agriculture, or sustainable forestry. So to facilitate that, we engage on a separate project with Open Systems Lab, using through the Timber Construction Innovation Fund, where we're working with a company of modern methods of construction on how we can track these materials and really monitor and track and trace their carbon footprint and their transport, and that will give us a much better sense of how these supply chains work and how these supply chains and how this material moves in the space and how materials have this sort of social life, right? So that is ongoing, but part of the outputs of this project involve a material passport for timber building elements, as well as manufacturing control plans to allow small companies and regional, sometimes rural SMEs to engage with more modern ways of producing housing. This is kind of ongoing, but we already have a bit of work around how those supply chains look like, the movement of materials in our region, and how to try to reduce that as much as we can. This is part of an initial project with the paneling we did for the hay farms. And at the moment, we're also looking into mapping as a quite interesting methodology to really think about these issues in the context of the town, but also its broader kind of natural environment. So the image you're seeing there is a mapping activity with students from Lausanne in Switzerland that are actually now using Bridport as a bit of a design challenge problem to go and design buildings as part of their architecture course led by Assemble Studio. There's a bit more to say, but so far in terms of the outputs that we have pulled out of this line of work, we have some technologies and some prototypes that are at the moment being shaped to be put at the service of this community, including material passport data, manufacturing control plans, and so on, as well as some other kind of upcoming publications that describe this in a bit more depth. But more importantly, for us in terms of impact and further work, we're very happy that some of our data briefing, particularly on the participation of young families, has been picked up by the City Council to kind of inform the development and the design of Ballwood House, which is a renovation of an existing building in Bridport for a reconversion of 8 housing units for 8 young families, which is fantastic. We received some university support as well through Enterprise Solutions and Get Involved Awards to work in Whitley Community Trust, which is in the north of Plymouth. This is a urban environment, particularly on rethinking prefabrication and rethinking Cornish units and whether we can use modern methods of construction for community-led retrofit of those units. And now in August, we're starting our fieldwork supported by our Impact Acceleration Account Fellowship to replicate this methodology, this way of thinking about modern methods of construction in southern Chile in partnership with the UN Habitat Rural Housing Program, which we're very kind of excited about. And that's starting now in August. So a lot of things happening now, a lot of work in progress. But yeah, that's the status of our research so far. And I think that's all. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Alejandro, and also to Rosie for your talks. Really fascinating to see the work going on there. So we've got some opportunity now, perhaps a round of applause virtually for all of our speakers. Thank you so much. Now we've got an opportunity for questions. If you would like to put your questions into the chat, we can see them and pick them up. And so please do put questions in the chat. But to get started, I'd like to start with Rosie first of all, because we have some questions come in for Rosie's talk. So Rosie, the first question we had was around interoperability and accessibility of data in smart homes. So I wonder if I can pass over to you to pick up on that question from one of the participants.
Yeah, so so it's not straightforward or simple. What I would say, I suppose, as an overarching point is that clearly it's in our commercial interest to be as open as possible. You know, we are in the foothills of this technology, and you know, we are connecting with particular manufacturers, etc., that we already use and partner with as part of our routine supply chain anyway. But what I'd say more generally, and I will read a bit of a message because I've been engaging with our tech people in the background as Alejandro was talking. But basically what they're saying is that Matter is coming and it will unlock much greater potential for interoperability. But that is a standard that is not yet mature, as I think was alluded to in the question. But because it is being increasingly widely adopted, and clearly with some big players in that, with Amazon, Apple, Google, etc., we do think that is likely to be for the future. At the moment, we are developing a new hub which will be Matter compatible, but we are focused on home energy management, and that uses Modbus, which is an industrial Internet of Things standard. We then convert that into Zigbee to get our products to the market. Our EV charger is on a different protocol, so we are absolutely kind of playing with this complexity all the time, and within our lab, working to make our hub and our Hive ecosystem as open and interconnected as it possibly can be. I hope that answers the question, and clearly happy to kind of engage further if that helps.
Thanks, Rosie. We've also had a sort of comment and a question from Kurt Borth from the Plymouth Net Zero Partnership. I don't know if you've read it online, but he's saying, thanks, Rosie. He was involved in a potential switchy trial at Changeworks in Scotland, and they had some concerns with technology barriers among some of the social housing residents and tenants, and just wondered if you have any comments on how similar issues have been addressed with the Hive system.
Yeah, so it's not just in social housing, but there is again a program of work and a work stream around homes where Wi-Fi isn't routinely available. And I guess our perspective on that is to have a kind of multifaceted approach to that. So with some projects, we may be supporting putting Wi-Fi into the home. We also clearly have a technology stream, which is how we can provide some of these devices without the requirement for Wi-Fi. And indeed, across, for example, our EV charging, we have GSM connectivity as well as Wi-Fi connectivity. So it is a known challenge, and clearly will require, as I say, that sort of multifaceted approach. None of these things have a silver bullet, unfortunately.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rosie. Alejandro, there's a question here for you around your work in Bridport and working with timber specifically. So the timber in the UK, mainly in the south, is a very low quality and not very suitable for building houses. How are you dealing with that?
That was a really large kind of surprise. It's interesting how the timber kind of landscape works in the south. You would think there is a lot of timber everywhere because you see kind of forests in places all the time, but the availability of materials is quite critical to the work happening in Bridport. We have identified that although there is some timber available locally, the supply chains are not connected. So people that not always all the stakeholders kind of talk to each other or are aware, or there is a lot of information or technical data about local timber available for certain different uses. That's something we're trying to kind of promote by working directly with local sawmills as part of our research, and we are trying to shift a little bit the thinking around procurement and specification of timber, because there is actually a few sawmills really close to Bridport that are working with us, and we're able to kind of facilitate that transition, if you wish. But it's either that and having a much more place-based local economy focus regarding where your material comes from, or transporting timber for really long distances and really increasing a lot of embodied carbon values. And in the context of manufacturing applications, you see materials like plywood, for example, which are barely or not at all produced in the UK. So more than 70% of our plywood comes from either China, Brazil, or Latvia. So it's either that or promoting local economies on the basis of the materials that you have. So that's an interesting challenge for us at the moment, but we're working with local sawmills to try to address that in the context of our research.
I have a quick question and a comment myself. It sort of follows on from what Debbie Cobbett was saying about the wonderful contrast of speakers here. I think it's really interesting as well. We've got Rosie talking about the digital world and how, the electricity and the data and control of our energy is becoming more and more important, and people really want to and need to be able to understand it and assess it and control it, make best choices for their homes. And then we've got you, Alejandro, talking about almost going back to grassroots, isn't it? Looking at our local materials, our vernacular materials, and as an architect, I think I find that really fascinating. I'll be really interested to see how over the next few years and decades that pans out. We've got this drive to try and go back to our roots, really look at natural materials, which are intrinsically, as you said, a little bit unpredictable in some ways, and can't completely control how they're going to behave, how they're going to work. But then at the same time, we're being asked to measure things really accurately and predict how much energy we're going to use and need. And I don't know, I guess it's a bit of a question to both of you there, really. What are your thoughts on how that clash of our two worlds is going to work out?
Well, I can answer that from a very personal perspective, because we are currently planning our own retrofit of our home, and seeking to combine the local and sort of much more natural products with with the green technology and the smart technology that I spoke to. And I guess for me, I'm still learning in this space, but it's a fascinating interplay between the technology and the data. When you think about the ventilation systems and things like that you'll need in your home, and the way that actually a lot of the better insulation systems are potentially around the kind of the natural insulating systems. So for me, again, I'm very passionate about the interplay of people and technology. And I guess I would now, from this morning, add a third element, which I hadn't really thought of before, about the interplay of the more, traditional, the natural materials in the built environment with the technology as well. And I guess that's where, if we're going to tackle net zero, we need to look at the solutions from all of these different spaces. So, yeah, a personal response rather than potentially a professional one. But.
Do I jump in, Sarah?
Yeah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, the context in which we're operating is really interesting on how they recognize all those kind of interrelated issues. So I haven't really addressed that in my presentation, but there is also community energy organizations in Bridport, for example, looking at those overlaps between energy and the built environment. There's also creative organizations looking into design aspects, particularly, not just architectural production, but also design aspects as well. And there is also a drive or an intention to really explore other material kind of markets and sectors more creatively as well. So they have a lot of like seaweed, they have a lot of flax as well. So there might be intentions to set up something around textiles, for example. So these kind of interrelated problems, as you say, I think they shape this understanding of kind of collective behavior, really, and how we know, and there is evidence that engaging with, for example, natural materials can promote other pro-environmental behaviors as well, and how these different ways of dealing with local issues are interconnected in a broader kind of bigger picture of different behaviors at different instances of and moments of this town. So we do recognize that some of that is a bit more peripheral to what we're doing, but it's a small town and everyone knows each other, so they're fairly present in things we do in Bridport as well.
That's great, thank you. I think as an architect, as I said, it's just the trials and tribulations of these are the considerations, these extra considerations now that we're being asked to make. Katharine, did you have a question?
I was just going to pick up on what Alejandro was saying there, and on another question we've had in around this, because I know that what you mentioned in the work is this idea of these passports, which to some extent is a sort of a piece of data, another form of data, but about the material passports, so including data on greenhouse gas emissions from making the item. Is it that full life cycle aspect of the material, or how are you envisaging those passports?
Yeah, so in that project, we do include the carbon footprint of making things. So that's kind of included. We work with Open Systems Lab, who has a quite thorough database of timber components and the carbon footprint. So that's already kind of embedded there, as well as transport data, where these things leave and where they go, let's say. The challenge is the life cycle assessment, because for that we need to kind of build something, take it down, and then simulate a whole life cycle, basically, which we are. So the pavilion that you saw in London in the UK construction week, that was now taken down and has been taken to Bridport for reassembly. So we're basically simulating a life cycle when different building elements are manufactured, put together, and then disassembled and moved elsewhere as well. So that's ongoing. So we don't have the results yet, but we have 2 or 3 different scenarios in that project to test out how life cycle looks like in the context of that specific data set. Yeah.
Questions are rolling in now. There's another one asking about the carbon impacts of digital technology as well as construction. I don't know if you want to speak about that a minute?
Yeah, I mean, everything, all those activities have an impact, isn't it? And it's about how do we offset or capture or think about carbon budgets a bit more strategically, isn't it? So we have done a bit of a review around things like material passports, for example, and why larger scale modern methods of construction factories don't seem to work very well in the UK. And there's a whole sectorial concern at the moment. And there is a parliamentary inquiry called What's Gone Wrong with Modern Methods of Construction in the UK, precisely because this seems to be seen as a very large carbon intensive, capital intensive, big factory that makes big houses and then ships them out. And then there is no scale economy in that because we're not building enough houses in the first place. So it seems to me like more distributed, place-based kind of ecosystemic interventions of innovation can be kind of de-risk that picture a little bit and can help us also promote local employment and really deal with carbon footprints in a slightly different way. That's one thing to say about that. And then the other one is that that also builds capacity, not just material capacity and productive capacity, but also capacity in terms of employability and in terms of local skills that need to be grown and developed to achieve these things. So we see that as a bit of a virtuous circle of kind of nice outcomes and outputs, but that's ongoing still. So we're still due to kind of measure that with a bit more detail and test out the results of that. Yeah.
And just to jump in, I think it links quite nicely onto Rupert Goddard's question: is there a large enough labour force to undertake retrofitting, e.g. improve thermal efficiency? As you were just saying about the number of people required to run a factory is probably significantly less than actually working with trades on site. So would you like to carry on, speak about that?
No, I mean, at the moment, people just tend to leave small towns, and it's important to kind of obviously try to grow on local skills for the sake of the well-being of the town itself, kind of keeping young families around and so on. But I'm mindful that Rosie can also jump in on the workforce issue as well. So I don't know, Rosie, if you might have anything else to add from your perspective.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you know, the sort of the development of the workforce needs to go sort of hand in hand with demand from a commercial perspective. But I would be quite blunt in my assessment that the short answer is we don't have a large enough qualified workforce currently to undertake the level of retrofit that is going to be required across the country. We are, in Centrica, we are recruiting an apprentice a day for the rest of this decade, which is how we are trying to, help support sort of, the wider green skills agenda. We clearly also have a large engineering workforce at the moment who, we need to upskill and reskill into some of the new technologies. I think it is a really live subject, and in a company the scale of ours, we're clearly engaging at a national level, but also through organisations such as the Green Construction Advisory Panel at a more local level. And clearly a key part of this is really engaging into the schools and the colleges. With my engagement across the Southwest region, I'm really struck about whether when I speak to students and apprentices about just their exposure to some of the green technology within the college environment, and therefore whether they're even considering, if they're going through their plumbing or their electrician qualifications, are they actually considering a future in the net zero technologies, or for example, some of the more traditional ones.
And just to add to that, Rosie, I know that Building Plymouth and Plymouth Energy Community and City College are doing great work in those areas and really trying to promote and provide opportunities for that training to take place.
Yeah, on that note, Sarah, I was going to maybe come back to you from the work you introduced around the Future Plymouth, but obviously the Future Cornwall, perhaps thinking about some of those challenges picking up, maybe to finish off, we could come back to what might be your anticipated sort of thing that you might want to do, even if it's just your aspirations at the moment around Future Cornwall, and where do we think though that might take us?
Yeah, thank you. I saw Amanda's question online as well. I think Future Cornwall is very much in the making at the moment. It's been a little bit delayed because of the general election, obviously, but once that's out the way, we can start to launch it. I think I'll probably try and launch it through the Future Plymouth channels initially, because we'll probably have a similar sort of following and engagement group, but along the lines of talking about all the various issues, whether it's renewable energy opportunities, what going all electric might really mean, talking about some of the transport and the connectivity issues across Cornwall, because it's such a diverse region, very stretched, quite different, difficult to reach some of the rural areas, but connectivity rather than just transport, maybe Wi-Fi and internet. There's all sorts of topics that are coming out of the woodwork, so I'm working closely with Cornwall Council at the moment to just try and tease out some of those issues and identify projects and people to really animate that and bring it to life, to sort of demonstrate to people what things are actually going on out there already and what they might like to get involved with, and things moving forward. So hopefully that's going to be just as successful as Future Plymouth. Watch this space.
Maybe next year's Sober Earth Institute conference will have some of the outcomes from
hopefully
in the region. Well, I think that starts to bring our session to a close. I know that we started with the session around the idea of obviously built environment being the theme and mobilising people power, and I think we've had some really interesting examples and some discussion around what that means, like whether we do that in a place-based, localised way, whether we enable people through digital technologies to be able to make choices about sort of behaviour change in their homes or in the places they are. So thank you so much to our two speakers and also to my co-chair, Sarah. I think we're going to move to the next session now, but yes, just thanks to everybody. And if we'd like to give another little round of applause to our speakers, and thank you to those who've been joining us online with their questions.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
We're not live anymore, are we?
End that one. Sorry,